Afternoon.
Thanks for joining us.
If you don't know where you want to go, then it doesn't matter which path you take, does it? Let me say that again. If you don't know where you want to go, then it doesn't matter which path you take, does it? If we were all together in person, I'd now ask people in the audience, like, shout out, who knows where that quote came from? But since I can't do that, I'll share that it's actually from the Cheshire Cat in Alice in Wonderland. And the reason I start this afternoon with that quote is because I actually think it's a great way to kick off what I want to focus on in terms of the progress that we've been watching, in particular over the past year within our industry. And that's really a alignment around where it is we want to go as an industry. When I stood here, when I stood on the stage at the USEA forum last year at the US Press Club, I actually talked about the fact how for the first time of my 20 plus years in the industry, I actually felt like we were starting to get some alignment. And I'm so excited to stand here today and say 12 months later, that alignment is really, truly coming together. And so that's really what I'm going to focus my remarks on today. As you heard, I am the CEO of a nonprofit called the Smart Electric Power Alliance, or SEPA, and our vision is to get to a carbon-free energy system by mid-century. We're working specifically on the electric power sector piece of that, and we are not a trade association. We actually don't represent the interests of any particular segment within the industry, but rather we work to serve as an unbiased, neutral convener of stakeholders who want to work collaboratively with us and each other to get to a clean and modern grid. And as I said, the momentum has really been building around that vision over the past year. But I also want to take a moment, and that's where I'm going to spend the majority of my time talking today. But I want to pause for a moment and just recognize that the progress didn't just start. We've been seeing progress for many decades. And in fact, back in the year 2000, more than 20 years ago, Seattle City Light, which is the electric utility serving, obviously, the area in and around Seattle, had a net zero goal. So we had a utility more than 20 years ago that had a net zero goal. But of course, we have seen the momentum build since then. We have seen more and more utilities with commitments. We have seen cities, states, corporations, and many others making commitments about reducing significant reduction of carbon. And now, as you all know, we have the final critical piece in place of having a federal administration that is also aligned with that vision. So the momentum's been building for many decades, but in particular over the past 5 years, and especially over the past year. But of course, when we were all together 12 months ago, we had no idea that we were about to enter a global pandemic. And so I know I certainly, and many others, at first when we got into the pandemic situation, we're really concerned about what was the impact going to be on this momentum that had been so impressively building over time. And really, so I started spending a number of weeks early on in the pandemic talking to CEOs at electric utilities about what was the impact, what did they anticipate the impact of COVID-19 being on their company's commitments to carbon reduction. And I think it's summed up very nicely by the interview that I did with Pedro Pizarro, the CEO of Edison International, when he said, although we have to deal with COVID-19 now, we still have to deal with the climate crisis. That's not going away. And as I talked to more and more utility CEOs and many others in this space, the theme was consistent. We cannot take our foot off the accelerator on our carbon reduction targets. We have to continue moving forward. And oh, by the way, in fact, as we look for ways to bring back the economy coming out of the pandemic, let's look for ways to do that actually revitalize the economy and also help us meet our carbon reduction targets at the same time. So really significant. So again, hearkening back to 12 months ago when I was speaking at this forum, I reported out to everyone that at that point in time, there were 18 US utilities that had either carbon-free or net zero commitments by 2050 or sooner. So 12 months ago, 18 utilities. Today, that number is 39, and it increases just about every week. I also last year told you that utilities that had significant carbon reduction targets represented, at that point in time, 56% of customers. Today, 12 months later, that number is 68%. So again, significant momentum despite COVID-19, the distractions of us that were brought into the equation as a result of that, as well as the other emerging issues that are critically important for everyone in our society to focus on. We still kept the focus on climate change, on carbon reduction, and what needs to get done. Now, of course, not every carbon reduction target is the same. And that's one thing that I would like to make sure that all of us in the energy community, who are, regardless of whether you're a subject matter expert or someone who is tangentially related to our field or involved in our field, really recognize that words matter, terminology matters. And what we often see happening is people interchangeably using the terms net zero, carbon-free, and 100% renewable. And what I ask of you is to be thoughtful, to make sure you understand the differences between those three terms. They are not interchangeable. They have different meanings. So it's very important that all of us are aware of the words that we're using. And as we're talking about a target, be it a state target, a corporate target, a utility target, that we ensure we're using the right words to represent what that target is intended to accomplish. I also want to talk about the fact that, okay, so targets are not the end all be all. But as I started with the quote from the Cheshire Cat, we need to know where we're going. So having a target is absolutely a critical first step, and in and of itself represents progress. But we also want to see meaningful meat on the bones that shows how any individual entity is going to begin making progress towards that target. So to that end, I thought I'd share one example of a utility target that's been set in the past 12 months, and that's Minnesota Power, who did adopt a target to get to carbon-free by 2050. But they also have a very critical interim goal. Interim goals can be extremely helpful. And while you may not have visibility into how you're going to get all the way to 100% today, many, including Minnesota Power, have visibility and are confident that they know how they can get to 80%. And in the case of Minnesota Power, they have an interim target of 80% by 2035. They have specific elements laid out of how they're going to do that in terms of the renewables that they're going to add to the system, in terms of dates in which they're going to do their final coal retirements. So these are the types of actual tangible, actionable steps that we're looking to see that not only any utility, but any entity that has put out a target that is many decades out into the future has other actionable steps that show how they plan to make progress on that. And I should say, I also want to mention, another element of progress. So when I was here last year, I would say in the months leading up to when I talked to this audience last year, so I was having conversations with utility executives across the country, particularly those that had not set targets. And I had been asking them, where's your head on this? Are you going to have a target? What are you thinking? Many of them pre-2020, the response to that was, we just don't know how we're going to get all the way to 100%. And we're a culture of engineers and numbers and plans. And so we can't get comfortable saying we're going to get to carbon free when we actually we can't make the math work right now. But it is progress that many of those utilities have realized that there is value in having a target that is out into the future. That again, they may not know how they're going to get all the way there, but they know how they're going to get most of the way there. So actually, I just want to point that out. That in and of itself is progress, that we have moved away from people saying, I'm not going to set a target. I'm not going to say where we're trying to go because I don't know how we're going to get there. But that's progress that people are getting over that and understanding the value of just having the target to begin with and to begin to lay out plans for what is visible and is possible given what they know today. At the Smart Electric Power Alliance, we're looking at a number of different angles around the transformation that's underway, in particular within the utility sector. And of course, one critical piece of that is the energy portfolio. How clean is the resource mix? So that's one piece, but that is not the only piece. There are a lot of other things that have to happen within the utility as a company, within the regulatory environment, within the industry, in order for all of us collectively to be successful with these carbon reduction targets. So we're also looking at things like corporate leadership. And in that case, what do we mean? We're looking at things like, are utilities, utility executive compensation packages tied to carbon reduction targets? Are they tied to the milestones that are related to, that we talked about earlier, adding renewables, retiring coal, et cetera, et cetera? What does the boardroom composition look like? Are there a diversity of perspectives at the table that are going to help the utility think about, from multiple perspectives, how they're going to make progress in a positive way in this transition? We're also looking at elements related to grid modernization, really modernizing the grid, because we do, and we heard Arshad speak earlier today from the Electric Power Research Institute about the importance of grid flexibility. We need a flexible grid. And in order to do that, there are a lot of things happening, but we need to make sure that the grid is planned in a way that we can take advantage of new resources, that we can operate the grid in new ways, ensuring that we're taking advantage of, for example, the new fleets of electric vehicles as they come onto the system. How do we utilize those as grid assets? Is the system designed? Is the grid itself designed to be able to do that? Do we have the software necessary in order to be able to evaluate how those resources as they get added are going to impact the grid? And then the final piece that we've been looking at within SEPA is what we called aligned actions and engagement. How is the utility doing in terms of its proactive approach to, for example, designing new customer programs to bring them options related to clean energy, to transportation electrification? How is the utility doing in terms of proactively engaging stakeholders, be it their customers, their regulators, their legislators, environmental groups, and others, to collectively work together in a meaningful way to figure out what the best path forward is to reach those targets within that particular service territory? So I share all of this, these four elements: the clean energy resources, the corporate leadership, the modern grid enablement, and the aligned actions and engagement is a framework that we've been using in an assessment of utilities across the US. And we're very excited that the results of that assessment will begin to be released at the end of the first quarter this year. So please stay tuned. Lots of really interesting and insightful information will be coming from SEPA regarding utilities' progress in this transformation. But there are a lot of details. There's a lot of things that have to happen to really keep this moving forward. And so SEPA's looking at all of these things. We look at them through, I talked about those four buckets, but all of our work falls into what we call pathways, or three SEPA pathways, which is regulatory and business innovation, grid integration, and electrification. And so with that, I'll close. I started with a quote from Cheshire the Cat. I will end with another quote from him, which is, "Every adventure requires a first step." And so just to again reiterate, having a target is not the end all be all, but it is a critical first step to get everyone aligned, to know where we're trying to head, so everybody is rowing the boat in the same direction to get us there. Thank you.